Look, a standard patrol, map, marks, weather, everything according to protocol. Even the route is known and well-traveled. But a day later, he disappeared. He said, "I'm going to the old mark, 5 minutes, and I'll be back." Didn't get in touch again. This is a story where a man did everything right, just not there. In April 1998, Zack O'Brien signed on for a temporary job as a soil monitoring technician with the Utah Department of Geohazards. He was 26 years old, a graduate of Idaho State College and a basic survival course at the University of Boulder. His personnel file read, "Disciplined, physically fit, no complaints." The contract was for 6 weeks, and his site was the east slope of the Gunnison Range, where slow ground movements and periodic micro sinkholes had been recorded in recent years. This is not a tourist area. The work was carried out in isolation, without marked trails, only along technical lines, temporary routes previously drawn by surveyors and checked against maps from 1985. Zack's official task: to record the condition of the markers that were installed along the stress lines, areas with the greatest risk of landslides and hidden cracks. Zack arrived at the base on April 11th. The first 2 days were an introductory briefing, equipment check. On the third day, he went on a solo patrol. The district coordinator wrote in the log, "O'Brien, D3 line, point U17, recheck mark, departure 080, estimated return 1330. There was one potentially dangerous section on the route, the southeastern ledge called Dead Drop. The terrain there drops sharply, and officially the only way around was along the upper edge from the north. Zack knew about this. It was recorded in the route sheet. He took with him a map, a standard emergency kit, a Motorola Sabre radio, a supply of water, a thermal jacket, and a snack for 5 hours. There were no problems with the weather. The morning was clear. The temperature was about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Communication was stable. The first marks on the radio were on schedule. 0914. First mark intact, 10:01. Passing a cut on the ridge, moving towards U17. That's all. After 10:01, silence. No signal, no answer to calls. When contact was not restored by lunchtime, Coordinator Marvin Reed began the standard check. Call sign on backup frequency, call back, record route. The first alarming discrepancy was recorded at 1320. According to the map, he couldn't reach U17. This section is closed. The marker was moved higher due to the 1996 slide. But the radio log says, moving towards U17 as if it is still in use. It shouldn't be on the map. And he walked straight towards her. When Coordinator Marvin Reed began checking the paper route map, the first thing he looked at was U17. It was an old marker used before 1996. After a spring landslide, that part of the line was deemed unstable, and the marker was moved 40 feet higher to U17A. It is on all the updated charts. The chart Zack was given that morning didn't show U17 at all. Nevertheless, he named it, not by chance, with a precise designation. Reed contacted engineer Lee Bennett, who had been in the area in '96 and remembered the site. He clarified, U-17 is an old pin with a tag. It was not removed. The tag itself could have physically remained, but the approach there is bad. The approach from below is impossible. The descent is dangerous, even in clear weather. Protocol did not stipulate that the technician would go to an obsolete point without permission. But when by 2:30 p.m. the connection was not restored, the group went out on the trail. 4 hours later, they reached the cutoff point, but there was no sign of Zack, no prints, no discarded equipment, no items, just a slid layer of soil, an old drill pin with the number U-17 slightly tilted. It was physically impossible to get down there, either with or without a rope. The relief is collapsed. On the left is a cliff, on the right is a scree. By evening, the weather began to deteriorate. The temperature dropped to 38 degrees. The wind picked up. The decision was to signal the helicopter to take off and wait for light. The first aerial reconnaissance began the next morning on April 14th, and already on the second pass, the pilot noticed movement was below the level of the ledge on a narrow ledge. Figure, one person, sitting. Next to him is a bright blue fabric, apparently a jacket. He doesn't give any signals, but he turns his head. He's alive. It is impossible to understand how he got there. The ledge is about 3 feet wide. There is no ascent to it. The descent is only vertical, with a difference in height of more than 40 feet. There is no safe access from either side. At 11:07, the following entry was received in the headquarters log. A person has been detected in an impossible position, not actively responding, but visual contact has been confirmed. Weather window is 3 hours. The helicopter hovered nearby, but landing was impossible. A rescuer with a rope descended from above. On the rope was a medic. 20 minutes later, Zack O'Brien was lifted on board. He was conscious, severely dehydrated, disoriented, but pulse was stable, body temperature was normal. In his pocket was a folded map, not wet, and in it was a strange detail. The point U-17 was marked with a felt-tip pen and underlined twice, and next to it is an arrow with a pen and the signature down the old one. It holds. After evacuation, Zack was taken to a clinic in Panguitch, where doctors found moderate dehydration, muscle wasting, and superficial scratches on his wrists and knees. There were no fractures or signs of a fall. He was weak, but alert. The first conversation with him took place in the evening of the same day. It was brief. I was following an old marker. I wanted to see if the pin was still intact. I knew it wasn't on the list, but it was on the map. He did not specify on which map. Officer Reed, who personally conducted the interrogation, noted, "He spoke confidently, no signs of disorientation, as if his route was normal. No doubt that he did what he was supposed to do, but he shouldn't have." The second key point is radio communications. The station logs note, at 10:01 Zack reported, passing the cut on the ridge, moving towards U-17. 5 minutes later, another call, which was not registered by the main system, but was saved in the radio station's backup recording. There was a short phrase, "I'm going to the mark, 5 minutes, and I'll be back." This message was recorded at 10:06, but in that area, the radio coverage is unstable, and none of the points from which he could send it provide direct communication without retransmission. That is, theoretically, the message should not have reached us directly, but it is recorded, and in it, the intonation is calm, as if he knew he would be back quickly. There were no further messages. All communication was lost. Later, during further questioning, Zack explained, "I remembered that people used to go there. There was an old mark there. I thought to check, maybe it was still there. I knew it was outside the diagram, but it was logical to just check." He did not explain why he would go to a mark that was not included in the route, and the main thing is how he got down there. Traces of debris dust were found on his boots, which is typical of the cornice below U-17. But according to topographic data, it is impossible to get there either from above or from the main path. One of the mountaineering rescuers who was there would later say, even if he had jumped there, he wouldn't have stayed on his feet, and he was whole. Zack only had one rope with him, a 10-meter one. It is not enough to reach that level. But he was there. He sat quietly, waited, and in his backpack he had a map with a mark that shouldn't have been there. When the observation helicopter lifted off from the southern station at 6:12 a.m. on April 14th, the coordinators did not expect to make visual contact. It was believed that Zack had either gotten lost in the western part of the ridge or, in the worst case, had wandered into the collapse zone, where the search would have to be conducted on foot. The alert level was designated as medium, since this was an experienced technician with a full set of equipment. But already at Aero 938, the pilot of the second plane, Dan Clayton, noticed a small movement on a narrow ledge below the cliff. The camera footage shows a man sitting with his back to the cliff, his arms hanging down. At his feet is a rolled-up blue raincoat. He does not wave his arms or shout, but turns his head in the direction of the noise of the propellers. Visual contact confirmed. This is Zack O'Brien, but the coordinates of this position puzzle everyone. It is below the obsolete U-17 marker, about 30 vertical feet, on a natural ledge about 3 feet wide, with no visible approaches. Checking the schematics shows that this level is not marked as available. No route, neither old nor emergency, passes through this point. When Clayton reports the coordinates to headquarters, the duty officer asks to repeat them twice. He checks the database and writes in the log, the person's position is in a no-go zone. Direct evacuation is impossible. Descent is only by air. By 10:40 a.m., the rescue team is ready to descend. The helicopter hovers about 20 feet above the ledge. A medic on a rope, secured, approaches Zack. He doesn't resist. He doesn't panic. When the rescuer comes up to him, he only says, "I didn't see myself leaving. I just realized I couldn't go back." After the evacuation, The helicopter makes an additional circle to record the point from the air. Dust, rocks, debris. But there was not a single trace of movement down the slope to this place. Later, during a technical inspection, they will discover that none of the paths on the northern side lead there, even with mountaineering equipment. The cornice is a remnant of a former rock fault. According to engineering reports from 1996, unsuitable for passage, vertical approach impossible. However, Zack was there, and most importantly, he did not try to get in touch after 10:06 a.m. When asked directly why, I thought it was too late, that it would be worse if I moved. And he added, I had a point. I sat by it. It seemed to me that it was right. In his notebook, there is a short note in pencil. It's holding here. It's raining. I'll turn back. It's not the same. After Zack's evacuation, the technical team on the ground was tasked with finding out whether it was physically possible to get to the ledge where he was found. Over the course of 2 days, 3 experienced rescuers and 1 mountaineering engineer surveyed the area from all accessible directions. The route that Zack could theoretically take down was supposed to start from the bypass line in the north and go along the dropped slab to the western wall. But after checking it, turned out that this section had completely collapsed in 1996. The surface was loose, shifted, the slabs were unstable. There was no sign of downward movement, no dropped rocks, no snags, no scratches on the rock. On the opposite side, there is only a plumb line. Below is loose scree and bushes. The cornice is isolated like a niche, and not a single rope, not a single attachment point. When researchers tried to simulate a possible descent similar to how Zack might have operated, they failed. Even with full safety equipment, without a special ladder or an airborne descent, they were unable to reach the platform. Meanwhile, at headquarters, the documentation service was studying the map found in Zack's backpack. This is a standard sheet from the updated route set, but it had an additional handwritten note on it. Holds on a curve, does not roll. And under the arrow there is an inscription, Old Entrance. Zack would later confirm that he had drawn it himself. He explained, It seemed to me that there was a shift, but the angle allowed it. I saw something like a step in the crack. I went and found myself at the bottom. He doesn't remember the moment of descent. He only says, didn't fall, just was there. This phrase raised suspicions among one of the experts. Engineer Altman, who participated in the survey, stated in his report, he couldn't have gotten there on the terrain. No man without a rope and training could have gotten there. We have no evidence that he went down, and no traces that he fell. Doctors confirmed no bruises, no signs of injury, no signs of dragging. The form was clean. Shoes are not damaged. Backpack without shifting the center of gravity, as if it were falling. A paradox arises. He was there, but I couldn't get there. Officer Reed wrote in his log, situation, man found in a spot he wasn't supposed to be. He's alive. He has the radio. He has the map. The tag is out of date. The readings are stable, but they don't match reality. And while he sat there, for 3 days, he did not call. He did not move. He did not try to get up, just waiting, on the ledge where you can't go down. After Zack O'Brien was evacuated, his gear was sent to the Internal Analysis Department. Of particular note was his field journal, a small, heavy-bound notebook of the type typically issued to temporary employees. The records were kept carefully. Each line, time, mark, brief description of the state of the point. The record for the day of patrol, 3 lines. World 41. The start has passed. No shift. Euro 9:15. Mark D9. No traces. Stone intact. 10:06. U-17 is holding. I'll go down and look at the bookmark. At first glance, there is nothing unusual, but the Engineering Verification Service found a contradiction. Altitude data, which Zack signed near the U-17 point, do not correspond to the actual position of the cornice. He stated approx. 6,020 feet, while the actual height of the cornice is about 6,080 feet. That is, he fixed himself 40 feet higher than he actually was. The error could have been attributed to fatigue, but according to the barometric tracker built into his watch, he had not descended below 6,100 feet, even after being detected. The tracker recorded the location at a point higher than it appears on the topographic map. But no expert could explain how this was possible. Also, on one of the back sheets of the journal, a diagram had been drawn in pencil, not typical of the time machine. A simple arc, a dot on the decline, and a caption. 6200 move, hold no pullback. The crack monitoring service confirmed that no employee had given Zack this data. The diagram was not the kind that would be printed in handouts, but in shape it resembles the rock displacement model used in the 1990s at training sessions in Boise, Idaho. When Zack was asked about this, he replied, "I've seen one like this before. I think it was in introductory class. I just remembered. I felt the trail pressing in. There was nothing underneath." The evidence seemed inconclusive, but Zack was stable, conscious, and showed no signs of delirium or disorientation. When they checked the map found on him, another anomaly was discovered. On the back, in the corner, under a layer of paper, there was an inscription pressed in, below the point, but not on it. There is no such phrase in any of the teaching materials. Official conclusion on the journal. The entries are internally logical, but the altitude data does not correspond to reality. The source of the diagram is not established. The handwriting is his. The question remains open. How could he think that he was at a height from which it would be physically impossible to save him, but at the same time he sat below, calmly, with a map and a plan, and with an error of exactly 40 feet. During the internal audit of the Geological Risk Service, special attention was paid to the mark that Zack mentioned in the radio, U-17. The tag itself was a steel pin with an engraved tag, a standard from the early 1990s. According to the documents, such tags are no longer installed. In 1997, they were replaced with polymer pegs with QR markings, which are less noticeable and safer in case of soil destruction. However, at the point where Zack said he went down to the cache, rescuers did indeed find an old-style pin driven into a crack in the rock slab. It was rusty, but the tag was clearly legible. U-17. What is strange is that this mark is no longer present in the technical documentation of the site for 1997 and 1998. Next to the pin is a fabric tag wrapped around the base, a fragment of dark, faded ribbon with a knot. From memory, such material was used for emergency marking in the early 90s, but since mid-1995, it has been officially withdrawn from circulation and is no longer supplied to field teams. When the tape was removed, a tiny tag was found sewn into the knot. DEC92YS1, presumably December 1992, first series batch. Question: how did material from 1992 end up in a site where no one had worked since then? Zack said he saw the mark from the trail. He claimed, "I recognized the material. The wind lifted it. I saw a knot. I thought it was pointing to a bookmark. And she was there. I didn't take a picture. I just checked." When asked if he had seen or heard of the film before, he replied, "No, but I knew that they were used. I thought someone left them, someone who worked before me." The Inventory Analysis Service checked all issued kits for the last 6 years. None of them contained material matching the composition and texture. Also, no reports were found on work in that area after the decommissioning of the U-17 site. It is unknown where the tape came from. It is not clear why the pin was not removed, and most importantly, who left the emergency marker in an area that has been officially closed since 1996. Officer Lowell, who led the investigation, wrote in a memo, "The logic of finding objects in the collapse zone does not stand up to scrutiny." Zack was apparently following a sign he couldn't physically see, unless it was intentionally left as a guide. And at this moment, the second line appears. If there was a landmark, and if it has survived, then for whom could it be left? 6 years after the site was removed from the system, 2 days after the rescue in the presence of service officers and a medical worker, Zack O'Brien made a written statement. In it, he described in detail how he moved along the route, how he saw the old mark, how he descended along the shifted edge, and how he ended up on the ledge where he was found. His explanation took 8 paragraphs. Everything was logical, calm, without exaggeration, no signs of panic, no time skips. He remembered the sequence of steps, turns, landmarks. The problem was different. This route was impossible. Along the entire length of the shifted edge, which he describes as a slope sloping to the left with hard ground, geologists have found no safe passage, not even theoretically. At the point, he indicated there was a loose slope with a drop of about 30 feet and a vertical drop at the very end. There were no traces, neither from shoes nor from touching the rock, neither his nor anyone else's. When Zack was told this, he just shrugged. "Maybe I was pulled to the right. I wasn't looking up. I was just walking along the edge. The path was like it was beaten out." He didn't take back his words. He didn't try to justify himself. He simply claimed that there was a line of movement and that he was simply moving according to logic. Later, when engineers checked the aerial photos and compared them with the map found on him, a discrepancy emerged. On his map, a thin, almost imperceptible bypass contour had been drawn in pencil. It went around the fault, along a line that geologists had previously used in emergency situations, but had never officially designated. This line passed where the landslide is now. But in 1992, according to archive data, it could be passed through. The map read, "If not up, holds." The only mention of this scheme in the archive was in an old service report dated December 1992. The author was a technician named J. Hamlin. The report was closed, the marker removed. The route has not been used since. Phrase in the report: "I left a warning tape on the discharge in case anyone comes after. Safe in dry weather." Zack never worked with Hamlin, never seen this report, and in his words, "I just went over the edge." Final service output: O'Brien found himself at an isolated point, following the logic of a route that officially does not exist. He survived, remained calm, and acted rationally. But the route he took was not indicated, was not mapped, and should not have been known to him. Entry in the headquarters log from the senior coordinator: "Technician missing, found alive. Everything seems to be explainable. Except for one thing: how did he get there?